Hello there, welcome to this Foxdog training video. Today we're going to be looking at setting up tenancy agreements. It's occurred to us here at Foxdog that perhaps lots of people manage their own tenancies, and so we felt that it would be appropriate to make sure that people were of what was really needed on the Assured Short-Hold Tenancy Agreement document. So we're going to be filling in this document live on the screen today just to give you an idea of what's involved and what the best practice is. We're also going to look at this document, the Section 21 notice, often referred to as a no blame eviction notice. It's a very useful document, and it's something that we always insist on our tenants signing at the start of any tenancy agreement, and we'll explain why we do that at the end when we come to it. So looking first at the document in front of us, you can see up in the front here, this one is from the Resident Landlords Association. So there's no need to really pay for expensive documents, expensive contracts, and things like that. If you're establishing your own tenancies, this particular one comes, as I say, from the Resident Landlords Association as part of your membership package with them. It's a fairly nominal fee. I think you pay something like £80 a year, but as you say, you get free contracts, you get opportunity to take part in training, you get you're kept current on changes in legislation that might impact you, and very importantly, you get free access to experts in the property field. National Landlords Association is a very similar organisation. We'd always recommend that you're a member of one or other or both of these organisations. But as we say, today we're looking at the AST from the Resident Landlords Association. So, as with all contracts, this is of course a legally binding contract, and before we start filling this out, in fact, we should point out that there's not necessarily a need in law to have a contract. You could have a word of mouth contract. The problem is that obviously wouldn't stand up in court if your tenancy was to go wrong, and you might find yourself in a bit of hot water, perhaps a little further down the field, maybe even years down the field. But so as well to have everything in writing, I think. Also, of course, one of the beauties of a good contract is it sets down in writing what you've agreed to do to the tenant, for the tenant, and they sign to say what they agree to do as part of that tenancy. So maybe, for example, you've told them to not smoke in the house and things like that. So as with any contract, the first thing that we need is the correct date. So I'm going to put today's date in, which is the 9th of May 2015. We need to know who the contract is between, so I'm going to say it's between me, Stephen Burke, and between two fictitious tenants. Let's say it's David Brown and Natalie Smith. Now, important word in here in the contract, it says that the contract is between me and them individually and together. That meaning, if one of them was to leave, say Natalie and David had an argument, and maybe David storms out, if Natalie stays in the house, it's making her aware that she's responsible for 100% of the rent. It's always worth keeping in mind that quite often tenants, they might split the rent 50-50, and in their own mind, they only owe you half the rent, and if the other person's left, then that's their problem. But of course, that's not how it is. So I would always point this bit out on the contract when I go through it with them. I tend to not read the contract in its entirety, though I do give them an opportunity to if they wish to do so. But I do point out key points such as this. Now, we're in the northwest of England, so for argument's sake, a two-bed terrace house would typically rent for £500 a month, maybe a little bit more. And in this column on the right-hand side here, we can select how often the rent is paid. And David and Natalie are going to pay monthly, every calendar month. That, of course, mean that they should pay £500. Rent must be paid in advance, so they would pay £500 when they moved in, and then they would the rent would be due again on the anniversary of the move-in date, which is set out on page 2 of the document when we come to it in a little while. If this was a multiple tenancy, and maybe you had a group of people living together, perhaps maybe more like students, and they're on the same contract, you'd need to select somebody to be responsible for the deposit. You obviously have to send the deposit away to one of the protection services. We always use the DPS. and the DPS will only allow you to name one person. So as a group, that they either need to pick somebody, or you need to pick somebody who will be responsible for the deposit. Potentially, if Natalie and David were quite young, maybe their parents had paid the deposit, so that would be relevant as well. Maybe they paid some or all to help them out. So that should be recorded on this document as well. So it might be that at the end of the tenancy, the deposit's getting returned to somebody else and not not David or Natalie. So we then need to know where the oh, I should add as well, I would normally just strike them out if they're not appropriate. It's pretty, just so it's clear that you've not forgotten to fill something in there. Obviously, it's important to know the address that the contract relates to. So for argument's sake, let's say this is a fictitious address again, 29 Acacia Road, Warrington, WA 27ZZ. It also then goes on that they will have the property and furniture for, I would always write 26 weeks here. You can write less if you want, I suppose. You can put any number in there, but the problem you've got is an AST to be legally binding currently has to be a minimum of 6 months. I tend to not go longer than that, because if things ain't working out between you and the tenant, it gives you very good time to break the tenancy after the 26 weeks and just to serve them notice and everyone depart on a friendly basis. It's important that you establish what that time period is. So this date from is when the rent would actually be due. So let's say that they're moving in today. So 9th of May 15, 26 weeks from that date, I can tell you, is the 7th of November 2015. Let's go and write 2015 in here too. So this is what is referred to as the fixed term of the tenancy. After the 7th of November and the 8th of November, the tenancy would become a rolling tenancy, meaning you or they can just give each other 30 days notice to leave. As I say, some people ask for longer contracts. If you're comfortable doing that, then by all means do. Let's say just for us, we've never really found a need to write a contract for longer than 26 weeks. We've just a lot of people are just looking for reassurance that that they have a home that can be stable. And it's been very rare for us to need to evict anyone and to ask them to leave a property. This point 4 here then is very important, just we're moving down the page. It says, we will let the property to you, individually and together, and only you, and I would always write other people I agree a tenancy with. And I do that in order to stop them, perhaps they decide they're struggling with the rent and they move a friend in and rent the back bedroom out for him. They're effectively moving a squatter in, and they're establishing an informal tenancy, which just isn't appropriate, especially for if there's issues with the tenancy that you needed to end. So I would make it clear at the very beginning that if they let the back room out, they are in breach of the contract and potentially could be evicted. I'd also make it very clear to them that if they did want somebody to live there, probably I'm okay with that. But if that's the case, I need to know about it, and we need to amend the details here and put the other person on the contract. Because of course, what would happen if, for example, their pal was to cause damage at the property? Whose deposit are you going to keep for that? You might find that Natalie and David don't want you to retain their deposit because their friend who you've allowed in has caused damage. So I would make that very clear to them, that if they're moving a guest in, obviously they can have people sleep over, they can have family or friends come to stay maybe for a week or two, but once that turns into several weeks and somebody's living there, you definitely need to know. Regarding the deposit, we said the rent was £500, so I always put another £50 on top, and the reason I do that is you need to take at least a month's deposit in order to make sure you get your final month's rent, and also just to give you a bit of leverage for if there's any kind of argument going on. Typically, for example, people want to leave at very short notice, which can cause you cash flow problems and can create a void which impacts your pocket quite hard. I would make the deposit £550, so it's actually a little bit more than 1 month's rent, and that the £50 then kind of helps to, one, it's a little bit more cash, and two, it helps to recompense you if there should be a problem at the end of the tenancy where you need to go for through a solicitor, so it's £50 towards those costs. Again, we've seldom had to keep deposits, but from time to time it does happen, sometimes by mutual agreement, other times we've had to go through the due process, but hopefully that's not something that would affect you. Lots of people take maybe 3 months rent as a deposit, but you need to be really careful if you're getting up over more than maybe 2 months. Typically people who are renting, especially in this sort of social demographic looking for a 2-bed terrace house, you might find that they struggle to find two months rent as a deposit and a month's rent as well up front. That may be quite a lot of cash for them. Also, as you push on beyond 2 months, potentially you're creating a different legal contract, and you might find if that deposit was contested, that they would argue that it actually wasn't a deposit, and you're just getting into dodgy territory, I think. So I would keep it south of 2 months rent. Let's say for me, a month.